Hello beautiful souls, Avalon here, and today I wanted to do a video about my Tarot True Loves, really. That's about what the gist of this video is all about. Now, what I mean by my Tarot True Loves are decks that over the years I have gone back to consistently. I have sought their magic, sought their wisdom, sought their merriment, their style, their personality, their story, their narrative. I have sought them out time and time again as the years go by, and they have always been a source of great comfort to me and of deep wisdom and tremendous inspiration. So I have selected 10 decks plus an honorable mention, and these are decks that I have had in my collection for a while. They're not decks that I acquired this year or last year or even the year before. They're decks that I've had for a couple of years, some longer than others, and they're just decks that no matter how many weeks, months, years go by, I am still attracted to them. I am still going back there. I'm still using them, and I'm still always so impressed. So let's get started. The first deck that I wanted to show you is this beautiful deck here. This is the Druidcraft Tarot. The Druidcraft Tarot is by Philip Carr-Gomm, and the artwork is by Will Worthington. I think Philip Carr-Gomm's wife, Stephanie Carr-Gomm, had a hand in this one here as well. This is a druidic deck, as the name suggests. It's the Druidcraft, and it is about the magical craft of the druid, and it has a beautiful earth-centric wisdom to it. It has a gentle grandfatherly type voice. It is a stunningly beautiful deck. It's quite large. I've seen this deck trimmed. It looks amazing, but this one here is not trimmed. It's quite large, and the images pull you in. It invites you in to further explore that narrative. This is a deck that is phenomenal for pathworking because it's so big, and because there is such a vibrant color to each of the scenes. You can go on a journey with each of the images if you choose to do so. So this is the Druidcraft Tarot, and it is without a doubt one of my absolute favorite decks. It is probably one of my most favorite decks, in fact, because it is a deck that I genuinely resonate with. I am quite earth-centric in my practice, and I genuinely resonate with its energy, and I would like more copies of this deck so I can trim and make look pretty like I have seen other people do. Yay! The next deck that I'm going to show you is this beautiful, beautiful deck here. This is the Bonefire Tarot, and this is by Gabby Angus West. Now, Gabby is an Australian tarot artist, or an Australian artist full stop, and I purchased this deck when it was a self-published beauty. It came in a little velveteen bag. It had a little bonfire wooden motif on it, and it is a stunning deck. The cardstock is beautiful, it's matte. The card size is smaller, so it's perfect for people with tiny hands like myself. So this deck for me is like the perfect size to shuffle and use. The colors are so vibrant. It's based on tattoo art, and I've got to say that I'm incredibly proud of Gabby, because her beautiful Bonefire deck was not just voted one of the top 10 decks by Eclectic Tarot in, I think, around 2010, but it was also recently picked up by a publisher. I do believe that publisher is Schiffer, and it has been mass produced. And I think that Gabby is such a wonderful, beautiful soul and fun story. She recently, in an attempt to celebrate her launch and her release of the mass marketed version of her deck, she asked me and a few other people if she could borrow my likeness to bonefire it, and that she did. So I have a bonefire image of myself as a cardslinger kind of thing, with my hand up in a figure that way, and I just got bonefired, and I thought, what a freaking honor, because the Bonefire Tarot is one of my absolute favorites. It is one of my absolute favorite decks, hands down. I go back to this deck time and time again. I love to use it on myself. I love to use it with others. It really is one of my little kindred decks. And so to be bonefired, to be turned into a character from the Bonefire, oh my god, it was so much fun. I loved it so much, and it makes me love this deck even more, really. The next deck I'm going to show you is the beautiful Crystal Visions Tarot by Jennifer Galasso. And the Crystal Visions was one of those decks that I acquired quite a few years ago. And when I saw it, I just thought that it was the most beautiful deck. Oh my god, it's the most beautiful deck I've ever seen! And I went bonkers for it. I was obsessed. I used it all of the time. It was one of my most used decks just after I got it, and I just thought that it was soft, it was sweet, it was gentle, it was beautiful, it was feminine, and it has this beautiful fairy feel to it. It's very whimsical in its depictions. It follows the rider beautifully in certain ways, but there's a beautiful colour palette used that is so wildly feminine, and it speaks to me. The purples, the pinks, oh my gosh, it's just such a lovely deck. And it is a deck that reads really, really well. It is a deck that I don't use as much as I did when I first acquired it, but it is a deck that I consistently go back to, that I reach for, and when I do, I've always got a big smile on my face because I remember that first initial impression of how beautiful this deck was, and that stays with me, and that's why I keep going back to it time and time again, because I've got a good memory with that deck. I've done so many readings with it, like so many readings with it, and so I know it quite well, and I feel very comfortable using it. The next deck I wanted to show you is this beauty here. It is the Dame Darcey Mermaid Tarot. I have 2 copies of this because there were 2 editions, and I've got to say this is an Etsy deck. It is self-published, and it's a deck that I didn't necessarily think that I would absolutely love, and yet when I got it, it took me just a smidge of time to use it. Once I used it, I was hooked. I was obsessed with it. I used it for everything, and I found that it was not an attuned deck. It was a very clear all-rounder. I could use this deck on anybody with any question, and I loved that. I loved that I had a deck like that. And I've got others like that as well, but this was one of the newer finds for me. And it is just such a beautiful, beautiful deck. It's made with just such yummy cardstock, and it follows the rider theme to a degree. There was a little bit of controversy around it, but that's sort of been swept away, and no hard feelings on anyone's part, and we've all moved on from that. But it is a deck that I just really loved and was impressed with when I got to use it. It's a deck that definitely surprised me, and it's a deck that I have a tremendous respect for because of the types of readings that it was able to deliver and the voice, the tone that it has. It's very lovely, and it's a straight shooter, and I love that. The next deck is the Anna K Tarot. And this is the mass marketed version of the Anna K Tarot, although I would love a copy of the independently published version of the Anna K. And if I ever see that up for grabs at a reasonable price, I will definitely get it. First of all, I would just like to say that I never really liked this deck. I looked at it and I remember thinking, no, not for me. The characters look a bit potato-y, and I don't know what it was about it, but I was just not interested, and I walked past this deck on the shelf of various bookstores time and time again. But then eventually I was a bit sort of starved for variety, and I just bought it on a whim, and I thought, what the heck, I'll use it. I saw the 8 of Swords in this deck, and I thought, yes, you have fucking nailed it. And I started to look at the deck in a different light because of that depiction of the 8 of Swords. I just looked at it in a different way, and I was really impressed with how the artist chose to convey many of her images. These are bold colours, very real depictions, and by real I mean that they feel like they're tangible. They don't feel like they're real because they look like they're photographic. It is a beautiful deck with such a great energy. And it's got I want to say it's got a grandmotherly feel, but it's got like a European grandmotherly feel, I must say. Definitely not any of my 2 grandmothers, but it's got such a wise crone voice, and it's a very even deck, and it gives a really, really great reading, and it's a deck that allows you to understand the tarot meanings a lot better than other decks that I have seen out there. There is an emotion to the Anna K that I think the artist has managed to capture beautifully, and it's because of that I would recommend this as a learning deck for sure, because there is a clarity to it that you don't get with all that many decks. There are lots of clones out there, yes, but the clones are so close to the Rider-Waite-Smith. The Anna Kay has chosen a different colour palette, has chosen a different even cultural perspective to go at this from, and still has managed to convey this deep emotion and this understanding of the meanings of the cards just flow through. It's a beautiful deck. They've done a wonderful job on it. The next deck I'm going to show you is my favourite deck to reach for in autumn. This is the Wildwood Tarot, and it is by Will Worthington with, I think it's written by Mark Ryan and John Matthews. I think. Is it Mark Ryan and John Matthews? Oh, I'm gonna have to look at that. Anyways, moving on. This is a non-traditional deck. It is a very, very pagan deck. In fact, the book itself follows the Wheel of the Year, which is really interesting. So if you ever wanted to learn how to merge tarot with the Wheel of the Year, if you're a pagan and you've ever wanted to do that, that is a great book to begin that process with for sure. There is such a mix of animal and man in this particular deck, and the archetypes that they have woven throughout this deck are really bursting to life in a very primal sense. I think this deck is an absolutely beautiful deck to use at autumn, and so I reach for it at every autumn. It is a deck that I have also happened to singe ever so slightly with some Palo Santo, because I find the smudging of decks can get very meditative for me, and there is some marks. They've been shuffled since. It's not bad, it's not burnt, but there was an issue there at one point. But it's a beautiful deck. It is also a deck that comes with a few keywords to it. Some of the titles have been changed, and there is just a whole new fresh pagan infusion to this deck that I really, really enjoy. So that is the Wildwood Tarot, one of my favorites. Now I'm reaching for another whimsical one, and that is the Shadowscapes Tarot by Stephanie Perryman-Law and Barbara Moore. Aside from the cardstock being a little bit flimsy on this deck, which we know, I'm not going to harp on about that, it is a stunningly beautiful deck. It really is a beautiful deck. The artwork is one of a kind. It is so whimsical. It's got this richness to it that just makes you want to dance on stars. It really does. My one complaint about this deck, and I think many would agree with me, is that I want it to be bigger so that I can see more of the detail. If you're familiar with Paulina Cassidy's decks, they're very detailed, they're very whimsical and detailed and very small. This deck has even more detail to it. Oh, that's upside down, sorry. This deck has even more detail to it, so I want it to be bigger. I want it to be the size of the Druidcraft or the size of the Star Child Tarot for that matter, and I hope that they one day come back and see the error of their ways with this deck and do make it a bit bigger and use a bit better cardstock. But it is one of those really beautiful tarot decks that just attract the eye. It photographs beautifully. It just creates this look and feel that is positively beautiful magic, and it's very light, it's very airy. It feels very fairy tale in a way, but I don't mean fairy tale in the specific sense of the word. It just feels very whimsical, and that's one thing that I really like about it. So, Shadowscapes Tarot. And now I'm going dark. I'm going brooding and mysterious and somewhat intimidating, and that is the beautiful Mari L Tarot by Mari White. Now, this deck is a heavy hitter. It has serious crone energy. It is a deck that is beyond complex. It is a deck that can really drag you to the depths of your soul in a reading. It can really, really take you to the darker parts of who you are if you want it to and you allow it to. It is a deck that is supreme for shadow work, but that's not its only function, and I feel that this deck sometimes gets pigeonholed as a great shadow reading deck. It is possible to do any kind of reading with the Marielle. They just all have a punch and a power to them. It's a deck that people listen to, and it's a deck that makes people feel uncomfortable. It's not a deck that makes you feel warm and fuzzy. The images can be confronting, and the messages that accompany the images can be confronting also. And it's a deck that just makes people feel uncomfortable, which is the best kind of deck because people pay attention to that which makes them feel uncomfortable. It is a beautiful deck. It is nice and big, and I have seen this deck trimmed to the point where people have actually lopped off the suits and just kept the image alone and turned it into an oracle, believing that they can read it best. Now, this is a deck that you absolutely can read intuitively, and I think that it is a phenomenal deck, whether you choose to read it intuitively or whether you choose to read it as it is. It also comes with a guidebook called Landscapes of the Abyss. And you do feel like you're tumbling down into the abyss of it when you read it. But if you're the type of person that doesn't enjoy your types of guidebooks, I would still recommend having a little bit of a flick through that one, because there are tidbits of information that allow the artwork to make a bit more sense. Otherwise, the artwork just feels wildly obscure. Now, if you're okay with wildly obscure and you like to read intuitively, this is definitely a deck that's going to take you to new depths and to new heights as well. It is a powerful working deck, I must say that. And it is a deck that I have 2 copies of, one which is autographed because I love it so fucking much. The next deck I'm going to show you is called the Silent Tarot. And the Silent Tarot was actually created by an ASMR artist and sold on Etsy, and it was a deck that was gifted to me. I absolutely love this deck. Oh, it's upside down. I love this deck. It is so quirky. It is so unusual. The fact that I actually got to see the ASMR videos of this deck, of the originals of this deck, which the artist made herself, just made it even more special to have. And I've got to say that I always come back to this deck because it just has such an unusual look and feel to it. It has such an unusual voice. It's so quirky, it's obscure. If I had to anthropomorphize this deck in some way, I would say that it resonates so much with the character of Abraham from the movie Hellboy. So the aquatic creature, yes, that's the character that this deck reminds me of. And I just really think that that's so quirky. And second last, but by no means least, is the beautiful Steampunk Tarot by Barbara Moore and Ali Fell. This deck is a beautiful work of art, let me tell you. It is such a great reader. It gives such a clear reading. It is so on point. It borderline scary with how on point it can be. And it is a deck that I reach for time and time again. I would consider this deck to be another all-rounder, despite the fact that it is heavily themed. The theme of this deck never gets in the way of me reading it in any situation, for any question. I think that this is an absolutely beautiful deck. It's got a warmth to it, and the artwork is so alluring. It's so beautiful. It's a storyteller for sure. And it just keeps me going back time and time again. I've had this deck for a really long time. I've loved it for a really long time. I keep going back to it always because it's just a little star, you know. It's a wonderful, wonderful deck. They did such good work on this one, I must say. I would have to say that this is probably one of my favourite Barbara Moore decks. I have another one or two. Speaking of Barbara Moore, my honourable mention has to be the wonderful Journey to the Hidden Realm, which is another Barbara Moore deck, so I think that this is another absolutely beautiful deck. Now, the reason why I am not submitting this as an overall favourite and just an honourable mention is because I did a video very recently about this deck being, you know, a deck that I'm just exploring the love again. And so I have showed this deck a little bit recently, and I'll just show a little bit again. So this is a Barbara Moore deck, and the artwork is by Julia Jeffries, aka the Stone Maiden. It is a deck that is borderless, it's beautiful, it's non-traditional, it is featured around the theme of fairy, as in the Guardians of the Natural World, and it is a deck that I think is so beautiful. I was so excited when that deck was to be released. I remember getting it just before I went away to the Gold Coast, and I took it with me. It was the only deck that I took, and it took me for such a ride because it's so non-traditional. It was described as being far too facey, a fact which I absolutely love about it because it drew you in. It made you feel part of the story. It created this kind of synergy between you and the cards, and it's just such a beautiful deck. So there you have it, folks. That is my top 10 Tarot True Loves. I would love to do another video like this because there are quite a few that I left out, but I didn't want this video to be oh so long. So I had a mixture of mass marketed, I had a mixture of self-published, I had a mixture of once upon a time self-published, now mass marketed. So there was a good variation throughout this particular selection, and that's kind of what I was going for. A little something for everyone there. Some light, some dark, some even, some all-rounders, some heavily themed. Oh, just deliciousness. So thank you so much for letting me sit here and take you through some of my absolute favorites. It was such a joy to be able to play with some of these decks again. I literally pulled some of these out of their boxes so that I could do this video, and now I'm going to keep them on my desk and I'm going to read with them for this rotation. So I'm really excited to be able to reconnect with each and every one of them in such a lovely way. So much love, many blessings. Mwah. Bye. Look after yourselves.